am not a prophet, nor a preacher, only a historian who studies the tremors left by ancient men of violence and faith. Among them, none casts a longer shadow than Samson. His story, preserved in the Book of Judges, chapters 13 through 16, is often told as a tale of divine strength and tragic weakness. But look closer, and you'll find something far more intricate: the anatomy of vengeance, the psychology of humiliation, and the tactics of a one-man insurgency waged under the banner of God. Samson's war was not just against the Philistines. It was against despair itself. The age of Judges was an age without kings, when each man did what was right in his own eyes. Israel, fractured and weary, had become a loose confederation of tribes more bound by memory than by unity. The Philistines, technologically superior and politically organized, ruled with a subtle tyranny, not occupation by sword, but domination by culture. They controlled trade, weaponry, even language. To them, Israel was not a nation but a nuisance. Into that vacuum of leadership, Samson was born, a child announced by an angel, consecrated before birth, destined to begin the deliverance of Israel. His hair was his covenant, his strength his signature, his destiny a paradox. For every act of deliverance he performed seemed to carry within it the seed of his own destruction. He was a Nazirite from the womb, forbidden wine, corpses, or razors, but discipline was never his virtue. His life begins with desire. He sees a Philistine woman in Timnah and declares, "Get her for me, for she pleases me well." That sentence is the thesis of his life: sight dictating will, desire directing destiny. His parents protest, but he persists. He marries outside the covenant community, a political and spiritual breach. At the wedding feast, he poses a riddle drawn from his own encounter with a lion. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. It is less a puzzle than a performance of dominance, a test of intellect, wit, and status. But when his wife betrays his secret to the Philistines, the game becomes blood. In fury, he slaughters 30 men of Ashkelon to pay his wager, then abandons his bride. In the space of 1 week, love becomes war. When Samson learns that his bride has been given to another man, his response is neither weeping nor retreat. He looks instead to the economy of his enemies. In a move as strange as it was brilliant, he captured 300 jackals, tied them tail to tail in pairs, fixed torches between them, and released them through the Philistine harvest. The flames devoured the standing grain, the stacked sheaves, the vineyards, and the olive orchards. To the untrained eye, it was a fit of rage. To a strategist, it was an act of economic warfare. Grain could regrow within a year, but vines and olive trees, the lifeblood of long-term wealth, took decades to mature. By burning them, Samson wasn't merely destroying food, he was destabilizing the future. In a single night, he crippled Philistine agriculture, insurance, and morale. It was asymmetric warfare in its purest form: minimal force, maximal shock. The Philistines retaliated in kind, not by confronting Samson directly, but by burning his former wife and her father alive. Collective punishment was their instrument of control. Terror was their diplomacy. And once again, they miscalculated. Samson answered, "If this is how you act, I swear I will be avenged on you, and after that I will stop." But vengeance, once awakened, is never content to stop. He struck them hip and thigh, a Hebrew idiom for ruthless, close-quarters slaughter, then withdrew to the rock of Etam, a fortress of limestone caves high in Judah's hills. The Philistines marched against him with an army. But the tragedy was not the invasion, it was the reaction of Samson's own people. 3,000 men of Judah climbed the hill, not to join him, but to hand him over. Their words sting through history. "Do you not know that the Philistines rule over us? What is this that you have done to us?" Here is the heart of Israel's bondage, not chains, but consent. Oppression had become normal. The enslaved had accepted the logic of their masters. Samson did not fight them. He allowed himself to be bound 2 new ropes, ceremonial in their freshness and delivered to the Philistines. In their arrogance, they believed the ropes and the darkness would hold. But when the enemy came shouting, "We have him," the text says, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. The ropes became like flax that caught fire, and the bonds melted from his hands. He seized the fresh jawbone of a donkey and turned it into a weapon. 1,000 Philistines fell before him, ironclad warriors cut down by an improvised tool, a peasant's refuse. Then he named the place Ramath-lehi, Hill of the Jawbone. Every victory carved another crack in the illusion of Philistine invincibility, yet each act of violence drove him further into isolation. He was winning battles but losing belonging. The deliverer had become a storm too fierce for the people he sought to free. The next recorded act of Samson reads like myth, but history remembers symbols as much as deeds. He went to Gaza, the southernmost of the Philistine capitals, a city of massive walls and bronze gates, the emblem of their power. There he entered a prostitute's house. The Philistines heard he was inside and surrounded the city, waiting for dawn to kill him. At midnight, Samson rose. He walked to the gate, the fortified threshold that defined the city's identity, and tore it from its hinges. Posts, bars, locks, bolts, the entire structure ripped from stone. Then he carried it 40 miles uphill toward Hebron, the heartland of Judah. It was not an escape, it was humiliation. The gate was the city's pride, the architectural statement of its sovereignty. By uprooting it, Samson didn't just defy their soldiers, he nullified their civilization. And he placed that symbol of ruin on a hill where every Israelite could see it, proof that Gaza's strength could be carried on one man's back. For the Philistine lords, this was intolerable. They could defeat armies, but not this. So they shifted from force to intelligence. Their next weapon would not be iron, it would be Delilah. The valley of Sarek was a fertile borderland, half Israelite, half Philistine, the kind of place where loyalties blurred and secrets sold well. There, Samson met Delilah. Her name in Hebrew means delicate, but the Philistines treated her as an instrument. The 5 lords approached with an offer, 1,100 pieces of silver each, a fortune fit for kings. Their objective was surgical. Find where his great strength lies, and how we may overpower him to bind and humble him. Delilah was not a courtesan seeking affection. She was an operative executing a mission. The ensuing sequence, 4 attempts. 3 deceptions reads like psychological warfare in miniature. 7 fresh bowstrings, a test of ritual symbolism. New ropes, the echo of the bonds the men of Judah once used, weaving the 7 locks of his hair into a loom, a tactic of entanglement, binding his consecration to domestic labor. Each time she cried, "The Philistines are upon you." Each time he broke free. Each time the secret grew smaller, the trust thinner. Then came the fatal plea. How can you say, "I love you," when your heart is not with me? Emotional siege, the oldest strategy of betrayal. Samson, weary of her persistence, finally told her all his heart. "A razor has never touched my head. I am a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, my strength will leave me." This confession was not about hair, it was about covenant. The hair was the final outward sign of inward consecration. By surrendering it, he surrendered the symbol of divine possession. Delilah let him sleep on her knees. The imagery is intimate, maternal, fatal. A man born by miracle dies by comfort. The razor whispered through the 7 locks, and the text records the most devastating line in the entire story. He did not know that the Lord had left him. When the Philistines seized him, there was no struggle. The unstoppable had become ordinary. They did not kill him. Execution would have been mercy. Instead, they gouged out his eyes, the seat of identity, vision, and pride. They bound him in bronze shackles, the same metal with which they forged their weapons, and dragged him to Gaza. There they set him to grinding grain in prison, the work of slaves and beasts. In that image lies the cruel genius of Philistine punishment. The champion who had once burned their harvests now turned their millstone. The destroyer of cities now powered their bread. To them it was justice. To heaven it was preparation. For in taking his sight they removed distraction. They stripped away vanity, lust, pride, noise. In the darkness of Gaza's prison, something ancient stirred: repentance, rage, memory, and quietly, imperceptibly, his hair began to grow. Blindness remade Samson. The eyes that had once betrayed him with desire now turned inward. He could no longer see the world, but he could feel its weight. Every rotation of the millstone carved focus into his muscles, discipline into his mind. The Philistines believed the threat had passed. They paraded him occasionally for mockery, a living trophy of Dagon's victory over Yahweh. They did not realize they had created something more dangerous than the sighted strongman, a man who had nothing left to lose. In warfare, the most lethal moment is not the first strike. It is the strike delivered by one who has already accepted death. Samson's strength would return, but this time without arrogance. It would be distilled into singular purpose, vengeance for his eyes. A great festival was proclaimed in Gaza, celebrating Dagon, the grain god who they believed had given Samson into their hands. The temple was crowded, the 5 lords, the nobles, merchants, commanders, and on the flat roof above, about 3,000 men and women. In total, the political and economic brain of Philistia gathered under one roof, the very roof that Samson would soon pull down. They called for the blind man to entertain them, a grotesque pageant of humiliation. Led by a boy, Samson was brought into the center court between 2 main pillars supporting the structure. He stood there, hands resting on stone, listening to the roar of his enemies, the clatter of their idols, the laughter echoing through the temple. Then he spoke the final words of his life. "O Lord God, remember me. Strengthen me only this once, that I may be avenged on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." No apology, no plea for freedom, just the clean, burning focus of justice. He braced himself between the pillars, one hand on each, and whispered, "Let me die with the Philistines." He pushed. The pillars cracked. Stone thundered. The roof caved in upon the revelers. The temple of Dagon became his tomb, and the bodies of the Philistine elite became his offering. The record ends with one sentence that closes an era. The dead whom he killed at his death were more than those he had killed during his life. The sound of that collapse reverberated through centuries. No chronicler could have captured the sheer sensory overload of it, the scream of splintering wood, the grinding roar of tumbling granite, the final gasp of 3,000 human voices vanishing beneath the dust. And somewhere beneath it all, one man, sightless, bleeding, triumphant, crushed beneath the weight of his own vengeance. Archaeologists still debate whether the Temple of Dagon was real, whether its pillars could have been wooden rather than stone, close enough for a man's arms to span. But for the historian, literal architecture matters less than moral architecture. The story stands because it fits the pattern of empires and insurgents, oppressors and the humiliated, over and over again. When those with power mock the powerless, and when humiliation becomes entertainment, collapse is never far away. In Gaza's ruin, we see the symmetry of divine justice and the tragedy of human blindness. The Philistines mocked a blind man. He made them blind to their own destruction. Samson's final act was not madness. It was calculus. If one man could take more lives in death than in life, then death itself became a strategy. To modern readers, this is unsettling. We like our heroes clean, our deliverers noble. But the Book of Judges gives us no such comfort. Its saviors are flawed, its victories stained. And Samson, above them all, embodies the paradox: chosen yet reckless, empowered yet enslaved, anointed yet undone. Let us, for a moment, remove the mythic veneer and study the man as history might. Samson was born into a society on the edge of cultural extinction. The Philistines controlled the iron trade, the key to military technology. Israel was fragmented, decentralized, armed mostly with bronze and memory. They had no king, no standing army, no national cohesion. Into that chaos, a single individual arose with genetic, psychological, and divine anomalies. He was a weapon disguised as a person, a man whose physical design exceeded the tactical logic of his time. His methods were not random. He practiced individual insurgency, centuries before that term existed. Where others fought wars with armies, he fought them with terror. Burning fields, assassinations, public humiliation, these were not outbursts but signals. He turned Philistine confidence against itself. Yet, unlike later generals or prophets, Samson lacked vision in the metaphorical sense long before he lost it literally. He never built a movement, never organized his people. His deliverance was personal, not collective, a vengeance, not a revolution. In him, Israel gained relief, not freedom. This, too, is the historian's tragedy, that the men who fight hardest against oppression often lack the political imagination to replace it. Samson could tear down gates but not build walls. He could shatter pillars but not foundations. Every ancient culture feared unregulated strength. The Greeks called it hybris, the arrogance that invites ruin. The Hebrews called it sin, the rebellion against the divine order. Samson's downfall sits precisely between those two meanings. He was not evil, he was excessive. He treated consecration as immunity, strength as entitlement. Each victory deepened his isolation until his relationship with God became a transaction, not a covenant. He used divine power for personal battles, and when the covenant finally broke, he mistook divine silence for divine absence. That moment, he did not know that the Lord had left him, is one of the most haunting lines in ancient literature. It is the moment every empire faces when its arrogance blinds it to decay, every leader faces when the applause outlasts the purpose. The historian sees the same pattern in every age. Power without discipline collapses inward. Faith without humility corrodes into idolatry, and vengeance, unchecked, consumes the avenger. Samson's hair grew again, yes, but so did his understanding. Blindness forced introspection, and in the end, he did what no judge before him had done. He surrendered his life willingly for his mission. He killed more in death than in life, not just by strength, but by understanding what strength was for. History is rarely about distance. It is about reflection. Every civilization carries its own Gaza, its temples of arrogance, its spectacles of humiliation. Every age finds its Samsons, those driven by wounded dignity, fueled by a divine rage against systemic contempt. We call them insurgents, revolutionaries, sometimes terrorists. But the line between deliverer and destroyer has always been drawn in perspective, not morality. Samson was a hero to the Hebrews, a monster to the Philistines. The same act that liberated one people annihilated another. To study Samson, then, is to study ourselves, our thirst for justice, our hunger for revenge, our uneasy relationship with power. We are fascinated by the man who tears down pillars because we secretly understand the impulse. We all live under structures that feel immovable, and we all, at times, imagine what it would take to bring them down. When Samson died, his brothers came down and took his body, burying him between Zorah and Eshtal in the tomb of his father Manoah. The text is almost tender there, a quiet aftershock after all the thunder. The historian pauses at that burial. There is no crown, no monument, no dynasty, just stone over dust and memory over myth. Yet in that silence, something profound emerges. God's justice had not been thwarted by human flaw, it had been fulfilled through it. In the theology of Judges, deliverance is messy. Grace does not require moral perfection, it requires willingness. Samson, blind and broken, became the instrument he could never be while sighted and proud. His death restored equilibrium not through righteousness, but through consequence. The ruins of Dagon's temple become a sermon in stone. The divine will does not always preserve, sometimes it dismantles. And sometimes, the only way to redeem a nation is to bury its idolaters under their own architecture. Every generation has its Samsons. They are not always soldiers or prophets. Sometimes they are whistleblowers, reformers, revolutionaries, people whose strength isolates them, whose defiance frightens the systems they challenge. They live on the edge of myth because society cannot categorize them easily, and almost always they end alone. The crowd that cheers their defiance rarely shelters their fall, but the historian must resist sentimentality. Samson's story is not a call to violence. It is a study in cause and effect. When a people are humiliated long enough, vengeance becomes liturgy. When faith is reduced to symbol, the symbol itself becomes sacred. And when strength replaces wisdom, collapse is only a matter of architecture. We remember Samson not because he was perfect, but because he was human. His story survives because it is the anatomy of our own contradictions. Our yearning for justice, our addiction to revenge, our blindness to the line between them. As I, the historian, close this record, I think often about those two pillars, the ones Samson found in the dark. Every civilization builds its own. One stands for power, the other for pride. Between them lies the arena of laughter, where the strong mock the fallen. And in every age, there comes a moment when someone sightless, wounded, forgotten, reaches out, finds the pillars and pushes. The historian is not here to celebrate the collapse, but to understand the silence that follows. Because in that silence, the dust settles, and in the ruins we begin again.